All right. Well, worship was just so great this morning. Thank you, Zach and team. I was just so feeling just the tenderness of the Lord. And so sorry if my eyes are like all puffy. Was just really feeling just that, the reality of the finding rest in the presence of God. And how that's just so real. And when we finally enter into that, just the like, oh, this is where I belong. This is the place where I find my rest. And so, just so beautiful this morning. Well, we are in this series of Seek, talking about 4 altars. And so the first week we talked about the altar of the heart. The second week we talked about the altar of the family. And so this morning I'm going to talk about the corporate altar. And so Duncan Campbell, this quote from him that we've been reading, he says, "For revival to come, God's fire must fall on 4 altars: the heart, the home, the church, and the region." I'll read that again because I don't have a slide for it. But he says, "For revival to come, God's fire must fall on 4 altars: the heart, the home, the church, and the region." And so I think as we have been diving into this, and as I talk about the corporate altar today, this is one of my favorite things to talk about because of what I have seen the Lord do in strengthening the heart and moving in the family and in moving in the region when we build the corporate altar. Charles Finney, he says, "If the presence of God is in the church, it will draw the church in. But if the presence of God is not in the church, the world will draw the church out." I think if we're honest, I would say that that's what we're seeing. And we're contending and believing that we would say, my hope and my prayer as this little community at Boulder Street Church, that we would say, not on my watch. Our culture needs us to contend for them. Our church needs His presence to be at the center of all we do. And so our heart, our ache is that when we gather here, is that Jesus' manifest presence is here. And that's what we want about everything else. Like, yes, I love seeing friends. Yes, I love giving hugs. But if He's not here, like, I can just hug you at my house or at a coffee shop. Like, we want Him, and we want Him to make Himself known. We want Him to be at the center of what we do. We want the presence of God to be the defining principle of why we gather. And so I was praying this earlier, but we don't want prayer program. We want a prayer culture. And so we want to give space to this. We want to give attention to it. Physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. How are we creating space? How are we giving attention to this? How are we shaping the rhythms of our church and when we gather, that it would be shaped around seeking His presence? And so, as your pastors, this is our heart. This is what we want for us. And we're still figuring this out. I know some Sundays it's like, oh, that was wonderful. And some Sundays it's like, oh, that was clunky, you know. And today actually marks 2 years for Dan and I getting the baton passed to us from Pastor Joseph. And so it's so crazy that it's already been 2 years. And so some of you might be like, man, like, have we figured this out yet? And I would just say, no. Thank you for your patience with us. But I just want you to know from our hearts that this is what is driving us. This is what we long for. This is what we're determined, that God's going to be at the center of our church. That we would be a praying people. That we would learn to sit at the feet of Jesus. And so I just want to thank all the worship leaders who've been sacrificing for the last couple weeks to come in here early. All the people who've been coming in to turn the sound on. Eric Gomez, thank you. He's downstairs. Oh. So sorry. I have no idea what's happening. Okay. So I think, though, the reality is that it's a fight to have the margin in order that it wouldn't just be a stated principle, but that it would be a lived out reality. And I think right now there's a lot of shaking happening in the church. There's a lot of shaking happening in kind of the global prayer movement. And I know that there's a lot of questioning and wrestling and what does it look like and what does it mean and is this valuable? And I just want to say that seeking God is going to be our organizing principle. Seeking his face, him being at the center. And I have such a just fear of the Lord. And then I want to help us love God. I want to help us serve him. I want to help us seek him. And that way it wouldn't be allocated to a season. It wouldn't be allocated to, well, when things are easy, when my schedule lightens up. When your schedule lightens up, I don't know the condition that your heart is going to be in by the time you make it there. Does our schedule ever lighten up? Never have I ever seen my schedule lighten up. But I love that this is Jesus' promise. He says in Luke 19:46, it is written, he said to them, my house will be a house of prayer. And when Jesus says it, he says, it will be. And so this is the anchor of my hope. Jesus, we will be a house of prayer. We will be a people that cry out to you in love and devotion as your friends, saying, your kingdom come, your will be done. We believe it matters. My role matters. Your voice matters. We will be this. And so would we be a people that yield to it? That don't resist him, that aren't like kicking the goats, like, ugh, that prayer thing again. Ugh, I don't really want that. This is what Jesus, he's going to do. And so can we say, okay, how do I get to be a part of it? What does it look like? So the corporate altar. What is the corporate altar? So I think scripturally, there's like over 1,000 references to altars. And it's this common theme. And so an altar basically was like an 8 by 8. I don't know how big this rug is. It's a rectangle. But, like an 8 by 8 square of stones that they would put something on. So they would offer atoning sacrifices. It was a way that they would memorialize things that happened, that they would give thanksgiving. I think the first altar that we see scripturally is Noah gets off the ark. He builds the first altar. Then we see Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. They're kind of the first ones to build family altars. And then we had communal altars. And this is the Hebrews and the Levites. They would oversaw in a community the altars. But then we have the corporate altar. And this is in the tent of meeting or in the tabernacle. And the Israelites, when they crossed the Red Sea, the story of Exodus is not mostly about them leaving slavery, but it was God preparing a people who would build him an altar where his glory could come and rest. And it was about them crossing the Red Sea was about them actually taking on a new identity. And it was the Lord saying, you are a kingdom of priests. I have delivered you that this is what you would be. And so when God's glory, it comes, and it rests in the temple. And so when that happens, there's no longer a need for the individual altar or the family altar of atonement, but only the corporate altar of atonement mattered. And so here's also what's different about the corporate altar, is that all the other altars, man would set the fire. He would gather the things and he would light it on fire, but the corporate altar, the fire fell from heaven. And so we have five instances when fire falls from heaven. So Leviticus 6 is when it's kind of the establishing of God's flame, him saying that the fire on the altar would never go out. So Leviticus 9:24, fire came out from the presence of the Lord and consumed the burnt offering. So God's the one who provided the fire, but it was the priest's job to attend it, to cultivate it. So the 5 instances of the fire from heaven falling. So Leviticus 9 is kind of the first time. Then we have 1 Chronicles, David's threshing floor in Mount Moriah. Solomon, he builds the temple. Then we have the showdown that Dan talked about last week with Elijah in 1 Kings. All right, and then I just want to highlight the last in Acts, when the fire falls from heaven. So this is Jesus. He's now come. He's now the atoning sacrifice. So we would think, we don't need altars anymore. But actually, it's just a brand new order. It's all the same components, but it's just a brand new order. So now he says, they're not just stones of rock, but we are now living stones. The altar is now the heart. And the Holy Spirit is the fire. And so, yes, we're so grateful that Jesus, he is the high priest. He has we've been atoned for our sin once and for all. But just because the atoning sacrifice has been offered once and for all, the altar of prayer and worship, it's no less important, but it's actually more valuable and more important. And prayer is now the primary purpose of the corporate altar. That we would come together as living stones and offer sacrifices of praise. I love that in Acts, we love looking at the early church. Yes? We're like, we want to be like them. I love that in Acts, when the fire falls, everyone gets it. It's not just the priest who would go into the Holy of Holies and he would experience God and see him, but now the fire, it rests on everyone. And they weren't by themselves at their houses. No, they were gathered together and the fire fell. They all got to experience it. And then from there in Acts 2, we see that they would continually, daily in prayer, 9 a.m., noon, and 3 p.m. That didn't go away. They gathered there. They gathered in their homes, but they gathered to pray. So 1 Peter 2, what I was just talking about. And coming to him as living stones, which has been rejected by men, but is choice and precious in the sight of God. You also, as living stones, are being built up as a spiritual house for a holy priesthood, to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. As a single stone, I can't build an altar. So I think the reality is there's this living stones being built together. And when we are being built together, then that fire can fall. So what's the sacrifice now? We know this. Hebrews 13:15. Through Jesus, therefore, let us continually offer to God a sacrifice of praise, the fruit of lips that confess his name. Do good and share with others, for with which such sacrifices God is pleased. We're all now a part of being this kingdom of priests, Revelation 1:6, who made us to be a kingdom of priests to his God and Father. To him be the glory and power forever and ever. Amen. 1 Peter 2:9. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for God's own possession, so that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who has called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. For you were once not a people, but now you're a people of God. You had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. I love all the adjectives that it's talking about here. He's saying that you've been delivered. You've been freed from sin, Revelation 1:5. You've been called out of darkness. If that's you, therefore, we ought be priests that proclaim his excellencies. If you've been shown mercy, then we ought proclaim his excellencies. If you've been set free, then we ought give him the worship that he's worthy of. So we're now a people, a Jesus people, that are a royal priesthood. So a little bit of my story. So in 2004, I was a youngin', moved out here from Texas, and so I've been contending in this city for over 20 years now, praying corporately with others. And the reason that I came, the reason I moved out here is because there was just this group of hungry people that I saw loved God and wanted to talk about Jesus. And so I signed up to do this internship, and all of a sudden I had to go to all these prayer meetings. And I was like, why? Like, like, man, these people, they like love Jesus and they were hungry for him. And then I had to like go to all these prayer meetings and sit there. You know, we had 2-hour prayer meetings and we had to go multiple days a week. And I was like, like, this is boring. This is hard. Why? But what I've seen happen and what happened in my own heart is just this love, this fire of the love of God fall in people's hearts from attending multiple prayer meetings a week when they didn't want to, when they felt like, oh God, like this is boring, this is hard. But what I've seen God do, an awakening love, and set people's hearts on fire in love and devotion to him. And there's something about the conviction, the faith to believe. Okay, and these leaders of mine, they were smarter than me, and they realized, like, okay, we're going to force them to show up. They're going to bring their cold heart. They're going to set it before the fire of his love, and in time, it will become tender. In time, they'll fall in love with him. In time, they'll start to care about the scriptures. They'll start to love the scriptures. In time, they'll start to pray. In time, they'll start to meet Jesus. In time, they'll start to get a heart for what he has a heart for. And now they're alive and love, and they love Jesus, and they love the body, and they love missions. But that only happens when you have the faith to believe, the discipline that, okay, I don't like this right now, but I'm going to believe in time, my heart will grow tender. And so I just want to encourage us and call us to, there's something about the sacrifices made to bring your heart to the corporate altar, that God does something that you cannot get on your own, at home, by yourself. There's something about coming and saying, okay, God, I'm here with other believers, and I'm committed to this place. And God moves. He likes it. He loves it. He loves this place, and he loves when you say, okay, I'm gonna get in my car, and I'm gonna drive downtown, and I'm gonna give my kid goldfish, a ton of it. Just bring the box, and just, okay, I'm gonna open the word, and I'm gonna bring my heart. And what he does, he captures, he meets you, and I ache. Jesus, you're worthy. And I've seen him awaken a heart. I've seen him sustain a heart in the dry seasons, in the valleys. I've seen how the corporate place keeps you tethered, keeps you, okay, right, I want to wander off. I want to deconstruct. I want to wallow in my self-pity and doubt and pain. And there's something about like coming again. I'm going to show up again, and I'm going to bring up my heart again. He keeps it tender. He keeps it guarded. I think my friend Caleb Culver, he said, as the day approaches, there's a demonic strategy to divorce our lives from the place of the corporate altar. I think, too, what's happening is when we don't attend the corporate altar, I think the gospel advancement is declining, too. That's also what dies. Because we're no longer getting his heart for the other. We just slowly become dull, asleep, preoccupied with my own chaos here, my own little chaos in my tribe. It's so easy. I'm there. I'm fighting this myself. Like, I can just give testimony to this last fall. We had to do a lot of stuff with school because of stuff that was going on with Aiden, and I didn't get to come to prayer meetings, and I saw the toll it took on my heart, that I wasn't bringing it. And it's like, yes, there are seasons when it's like, okay, you got to focus in on family, But then it's like, okay, but I can't stay there for long because I slowly saw what started to happen in my heart and just only becoming consumed with right here in my little world. And so I just want to just ask you, like, God, please believe me that it's we gotta fight to not just be right here. Like, okay, we gotta come and we gotta be a living stone. So why are we so quick to neglect this altar? People, preferences, and priorities. People, here's the thing. We're all different. we all have different preferences. I know sometimes you don't like the drums. I know sometimes the music's too loud. I know sometimes it's like, oh God, like, why is Amy screaming in the mic again? You know, like she's just saying the same thing. You know, like why, you know, like we have preferences and we, you know, like I don't want to sit next to that smelly person. Like, oh God, like I don't really want to be friends with that person. You know, like whatever. Like, I love Lee Cummings also. He says, worship is about his presence, not your preference. And worship is about his worth, not how you feel. And listen, we're a small church. Yes? Yes. Okay. I've worked at New Life. You never get a fib on anything. Like worship is executed perfectly. Like screens work, you know, like nothing breaks. Okay? Like, but we're a small church. So the reality is it's a little bit clunkier, okay? Like we don't have the program perfected. And so I don't know why I'm saying this. So just the idea of like, but he's worthy. And even when it's not perfect, he's worthy. And even when the worship isn't perfect, would we be worshipers? Because this is who we are. We can't change the lighting in here. If you want a dark church, we're just not going to be a dark church unless you come to prayer meeting. Prayer meeting is when it's dark in here. So if you want that, come to prayer meeting. Okay. So I think that scripturally, when we look at Jonah, he comes to mind. And he didn't want to go to Nineveh because he was content with what he had. He was content with what he knew. And he was like, oh, God, like, I don't want to go to them. Like, I'm good. And sadly, this is what I feel like is happening to families in the American church right now. It's just all about me and my family, we're good. And we've stopped caring about the other. We're called to go to Nineveh. We're called to come in and we're called to go out. We're not called to come in and retreat. And this is what I see happening. And yes, we want to tend to the altar of our heart. We talked about tending to the altar of our family. But we need to be delivered from the spirit of Jonah, like where we don't care. We don't care anymore about what's happening in our culture. We don't care what's happening in this nation or the nations of the world. We don't care what's happening to teenagers and that a generation like was going to hell. Like, and so God help me, awaken me to the reality of I want to care. But the reality is I'm so guilty of this because I don't have social media. It's like I hate all of that stuff. It's great. Some people need it. It's great, whatever. But, you know, I'm so like, I want to fight for my heart. But sometimes I can be naive. Sometimes I don't really know what's happening. Sometimes I'm like clueless. Like, what's happening in the world? Like, because I hate phones. I'm like, get rid of the phones, you know, like, get rid of social media. But it's easy for me to just kind of become consumed of my own little world and not know the pain, the suffering that I'm supposed to be a part of, even in the little small way that I can, as a mom with kids, that like, I need to know so that I can be in partnership with Jesus. I don't want to be like Jonah, but God, deliver me from that I would have an awakening that I need to contend and pray for and come into your presence, but take it with me. I need to come into your presence and contend that a generation would know you. So the only solution for the corporate crisis is the corporate altar. This is where we find ourselves, and this is the tension that we find ourselves in. I think even to, great men of God in the Old Testament, they were still swept away in the corporate judgments of God. And I think sometimes it's like, well, if I'm okay, if me and my little huddle, if we're okay, but what's happening culturally, would we not be okay with on our watch? So, what are we doing? Hear about it. I said this earlier, but we just want the organizing principle of our church to be to seek him. And so, Dan and I, like David, he brought the ark back, And he was like, we're putting this at the center. We're making this the center. Worship and prayer is going to be the center of what we do. I think also I resonate with Jehoshaphat. When he, as the king, he wasn't himself a Levite. He wasn't himself a musician. But he was like, send the Levites. We need the worshipers to go out front. We need them to lead the way. And I think that, when we gather, one of the reasons that worship is so important to us is because when we combine worship and prayer, I think it makes praying a little bit easier. Not always, but it can. And what happens is when we gather corporately, rather than just, I imagine like when I pray by myself, I'm like shooting off little arrows in the enemy's camp. I'm like, pew, 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 But like when we gather corporately, it's like we're like lining up a cannon together to like explode in the enemy's camp. And so I just want to encourage you, like, as we come, it's not like we're sending off these little arrows, pew, pew, but it's like, okay, we're lining up the cannon together to go together. And so I think my prayer is that as Dan and I, even as elders, leaders, is that not just us, but all of us would begin to realize this is a part of my corporate identity. This is a part of who I am, not just who they are. And would we all see that creating a resting place for the Lord is a part of all of our responsibility. Like, I can sit at home and pray by myself, but we come here in order to gather together. And so my prayer is that, help us, Lord. Where do we need to cleanse the clutter? Where do we have it's so easy to get swept away in all the schedules and all the busyness. And I think I just want to ask Jesus, what do you think? Am I allocating time and energy towards the things that you're calling me to right now? Where do I need to repent, reappropriate, refocus? Where do I need to clear the things that are competing for my attention? It's so crazy. I did some wonderful Google searching, and it says Americans spend an average of 35 hours per week on our phones. That's like a full-time job on our phones. Sports. Okay, where is that? People age 15 and older spend an average of 35 hours a week on leisure and sports activities. Average American spends 7 hours and 3 minutes per day on screens. 92 minutes on TV. 85 minutes streaming TV. 45 minutes of like YouTube scrolling. I think the thing is that we do have time. I think we just aren't aware of where it goes. And if I'm honest, isn't it wild how like you can be on your phone and it's like, oh gosh, where did the time go? Yes, it makes life so much easier when I'm having to sit in the car and wait in carpool. Like, bless the Lord for my phone. But where are we giving our attention? I love Arliss and Doc Hefty. They were elders here, and I remember one time she looked at me, she goes, Amy, I just want to give you permission to go through the drive-thru. And I was like, that is what I needed. Like, permission to go, okay, getting my family down to prayer meeting, it is a sacrifice, and it's hard to get here after school by 6 o'clock. And I remember when she said that, it was like, okay, my kid is going to be okay if they have food from the drive-thru once a week in order that we can get to prayer meeting. Like, he's going to take care of them. And so some of you just need to hear, like, give yourself permission. Like, go through the drive-thru. That's my call to get to prayer meeting, that would zeal for his house consume us. God, would we be consumed with coming and partnering with you as your friends to love you? And so my encouragement today that I just want to end with is just asking the Lord that he would ultimately increase his burden. The thing is that we just have to care. Like, I can talk about prayer, we can talk about altars, all that we want. But what in reality, we need the burden of the Lord to care about what he cares about. That he would increase our faith to believe that our prayers actually matter. That he would restore hunger, restore passion, that he would give us, I don't know if it was a song, but a while back, but the gift of tears. Like, would he give us tears to care? Like, that is a gift, right? Man, yes, so grateful for tears when they're from the presence of God. So grateful for tears when I'm crying out with a burden because I care about what the Lord's heart is.